The laughter in the dojo wasn't joyful. It was sharp, biting, the kind that cuts deep and lingers long after the noise dies down. 20 students stood in a loose circle, eyes fixed on the woman at the center like she was a joke they all agreed on. She looked out of place. Gray sweatshirt, faded leggings, cheap sneakers that had clearly seen better days. Her blonde hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, nothing polished or styled. She kept her eyes low, shoulders slightly hunched, like she already knew what they thought of her, and didn't have the energy to fight it. One of the instructors, a tall man named Brad with slick hair and the kind of confidence that came easy to people who never really earned it, couldn't help himself. He smirked and asked if she had wandered in from a senior yoga class by mistake. A few others chuckled too loud, feeding off each other like hyenas around a carcass. Ashley, the dojo's star student, strutted over with a smirk that didn't bother to hide its cruelty. She moved like she owned the floor, eyes scanning the woman with practiced superiority. She made a show of sighing, then called out that she'd been paired with the grandma. The woman didn't argue. She nodded politely, stepped forward in a stance so basic it looked like something copied from a YouTube video. The room buzzed with anticipation. Ashley flexed for the crowd, clearly savoring the moment. Everyone expected the same outcome, a quick hit, a stumble, more laughter. And they got it. The woman didn't even try to block. Ashley's roundhouse connected with her shoulder, sending her back a few steps. Laughter erupted like they were watching stand-up, not a sparring match. Brad leaned in and told her, maybe karate wasn't for everyone. Maybe she'd be more comfortable with Tai Chi. His tone dripped with fake patience, like he was trying to be helpful while humiliating her. She just nodded again, eyes still lowered. But if anyone had looked closely, really looked, they might have noticed something off. Not fear, not embarrassment, patience, controlled, measured, and waiting. It didn't fit the scene. Not with the insults, the laughter, the looks of mock pity. It was like she was holding back a storm no one else could sense. And if they had known who she really was, if they had even guessed, not one of them would have stepped on that mat. Not one of them would have dared to laugh. Because by the end of the week, the name Sarah Brooks would no longer be a punchline. It would be legend. Part 1. The Quiet Librarian with a Secret Past. Sarah Brooks lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up building in a quiet corner of Brooklyn. The stairs creaked beneath her feet every morning at 5, like they were used to her rhythm by now. She never needed an alarm, not in the last 10 years. Her apartment was small, functional, and almost entirely silent. The radiator clanked in winter, and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors argue about groceries or forget to mute their late-night phone calls. But Sarah never complained. Not to the landlord, not to the other tenants. Her morning ritual was steady and simple. 1 cup of black coffee brewed on the same old machine she bought a decade ago. No cream, no sugar. She sipped it slowly by the window, watching the street below fill with joggers, dog walkers, delivery trucks starting their days. Inside, the apartment looked like someone had moved in temporarily and never got around to leaving. A clock on the wall, a couch with a thin throw blanket, a small bookshelf holding paperbacks worn at the spines. The walls were bare except for 1 framed library poster that reminded visitors to read for joy. Most of her furniture came from second-hand stores. The couch had a sunken cushion from years of the same seated posture, and the lamp beside it had a slight flicker Sarah never bothered to fix. Her bedding was always folded tight, hospital style, a habit she never unlearned. She wore muted colors, mostly gray-brown or faded denim. No prints, no bright fabrics. Her hair was blonde but not styled, usually pulled into a low ponytail or left down in soft waves she never tried to tame. Her neighbors knew her as the polite woman who held the door open and never made small talk. She always offered a kind smile but rarely stayed to chat. Most people assumed she had no family because they never saw visitors come or go. At the Brooklyn Public Library, she was Miss Brooks. Children loved her because she spoke to them like they mattered, not like they were just small bodies in a reading group. She had a way of calming down the loudest kids and drawing out the quietest ones. She ran story hour twice a week, and teenagers sometimes stopped by just to ask what she was reading lately. Her co-workers said she had the patience of a saint. Even when the copy machine broke or someone spilled juice on the picture book, she never raised her voice. Her supervisor once told someone in confidence that Sarah was the most dependable person she'd ever worked with. Never late, never missed a shift, but also never shared much beyond work. No family photos, No framed degrees. Nothing on her desk but a small tin of lip balm, a pencil jar, and a clean stack of to-do lists written in the same neat handwriting. What made her stand out wasn't what she said, but what she didn't. People remembered how quiet she was after they left her presence, like she pulled energy inward and never wasted it on performance. She lived her life with such deliberate stillness that most forgot to wonder why. But there were signs. A faint scar that ran just under her sleeve, the calluses on her hands that didn't match the softness of her job. Once a coworker helped her carry a heavy box and mentioned she had the grip strength of a rock climber. Sarah smiled but said nothing, just thanked them, and moved on like the comment meant nothing at all. In her bedroom closet behind the coats and storage boxes there was a small wooden chest she hadn't opened in years. It sat in the dark, untouched, covered in dust like a piece of the past she didn't want to remember but couldn't quite let go. To the world, Sarah Brooks was a quiet librarian, the kind who always remembered your name, fixed the bindings on old books, and shelved them with care. But nobody really knew who she was before she moved to New York, and nobody ever asked. Part 2. The place where warriors pretend. The Yamamoto dojo had polished floors and bright overhead lights that gave everything a hard, glossy sheen. Mirrors lined the far wall, not for correction but for admiration. It looked less like a place to train warriors and more like a gym for people who wanted to be seen training. Brad, the head instructor, wore his black belt like a fashion statement. His GI was always too crisp, his hair too perfect, and his ego showed before he did. He spoke in a tone that was half coach, half influencer, always a little louder than necessary. Ashley was the star student, barely in her 20s, with a sharp ponytail and a sharper tongue. Her form was flashy, her movements designed for attention, not efficiency. She treated new students like props in her ongoing performance. Mike was all muscle and no patience. He grinned when others failed, flexed when he walked, and tossed lazy jokes like confetti. Every punch he threw came with a comment like the violence wasn't real unless someone laughed. The dojo wasn't built on discipline. It was built on performance. The ranking system mattered more than the practice, and nobody cared about humility if you could show off a spinning kick on camera. When Sarah walked in for the first time, everything paused for half a second. She didn't belong there, not by their standards. Her sweatshirt was plain, her shoes were worn, and she didn't try to fake confidence she didn't feel. Brad looked her up and down like she was a package delivered to the wrong address. His smile was polite in the way a smirk is polite. He welcomed her with a tone that already had doubt baked in. Ashley whispered something to Mike, who chuckled and didn't bother hiding it. Their eyes followed Sarah as she signed the waiver like they were already planning her embarrassment. New students were a source of entertainment, especially ones like her. She stood quietly while the others stretched and joked. No one offered to help her. No one asked her name. They made space around her not with kindness, but with exclusion. The dojo claimed to be open to all, but the room made it clear there were rules for who mattered. The strong led the show. The flashy got praise. And the quiet didn't survive long. Sarah kept her gaze low, listening more than she looked. The room was filled with noise, but none of it was real strength. She saw gaps in their stances, poor footwork tension where there should have been calm. No one noticed how carefully she was watching. They were too busy watching each other, too busy showing off to realize they'd welcomed something dangerous into their little stage. This was a place where people pretended to be warriors, but Sarah didn't come to pretend. She came to remember who she had once been, and what it had cost her to forget. Part 3. Elena the Thunderhand. 3.1. A Girl Born to Fight. Before she was Sarah Brooks, she was Elena Volkov, a name that once made grown men flinch and whisper. Her story didn't begin with trophies or medals. It began in the back room of a rundown Texas orphanage where she learned early that silence kept you safe and fists kept you fed. She was 7 when Master James Crawford came to teach a self-defense class for the staff and older kids. He noticed her right away, not because she spoke up or asked questions, but because she didn't flinch, didn't fidget, and didn't blink when 2 boys twice her size started sparring near her. While the other kids were playing or chatting, Elena stood in the corner watching every move. Her eyes tracked every shift in weight, every fake-out, every mistake. Crawford called her a natural, not because she looked strong, but because she looked like she already knew what strength required. He pulled her aside after class and asked if she wanted to learn more. She nodded once, calm and sure, like she'd already decided years ago. Within a week, he started training her every morning before school and again every night after dinner. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't balanced. She trained harder than any student he ever had because she didn't have anything else to believe in. She ran drills until her legs shook, held stances until her fingers went numb, and practiced breathing through pain, until pain didn't matter. By 12, she could break wooden boards with open palm strikes. By 14, she was sparring with adults and beating them. Crawford told his assistant once that talent like hers wasn't made. It was born. And Elena was born for war. At 15, she entered her first underground tournament under a fake name. She fought a man in his 20s and dropped him with one clean elbow to the throat. No one saw it coming. It wasn't flashy. It was perfect. Word spread fast. A blonde girl with ice in her veins and thunder in her fists. She didn't smile. She didn't talk trash. She just walked into the ring, ended the match, and walked out again. They started calling her Thunderhand after a match in Dallas where 3 cameras failed to catch the exact moment she landed a strike. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a thunderclap. Her opponent didn't get up for 10 minutes. By the time she was 18, she held black belts in Shotokan Karate Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She trained 18 hours a day and barely ate. She lived in the studio on the floor with nothing but her gear bag and a sleeping mat. Master Crawford treated her like a daughter, but his love came in the form of more drills, more discipline, and no shortcuts. He told her legends weren't made in comfort. They were forged in sweat and sacrifice. She believed him. Between sanctioned fights and private underground events, she went undefeated. 200 wins, no losses. Some matches lasted less than a minute. Others pushed her to the edge, but none could stop her. By 22, she had offers from elite gyms, national teams, and international sponsors. But she refused them all. She wasn't fighting for money or fame. She was fighting to keep moving, to keep her mind quiet, to feel like she mattered. The world started to take notice even beyond martial arts circles. Clips of her fights went viral. Commentators said she didn't move like a fighter. She moved like a force of nature, cold, precise, beautiful, and devastating. They called her the ghost with fists, the legend in a ponytail, Thunderhand, a name whispered in locker rooms and fight forums around the world. But behind every nickname and every broken opponent, Elena was still just the girl from the orphanage, still trying to prove she was more than invisible. She didn't celebrate her victories. She didn't hang photos on the wall. She just trained harder, moved faster, and struck cleaner. Power was the only thing she trusted, until the day that trust was broken forever. 3.2. When power attracts darkness. Power made Elena famous, but it also painted a target on her back. After a fight in Las Vegas, a man in a tailored suit approached her with a smile that never reached his eyes. His name was Viktor Romanov, and everyone in the underground world knew who he was. He offered her more money than she'd ever seen to work as his personal enforcer, travel the world, settle his scores live in luxury. She didn't hesitate. She said no. He smiled, nodded like a gentleman, and left without argument. 2 weeks later, everything she loved began to unravel. It started with Daniel. Daniel Morrison was the first person who saw her as more than a fighter. He was a trauma surgeon with kind hands and a quiet laugh. They met after she fractured her wrist during training, a mistake that should have been small. But Daniel didn't treat her like a warrior. He treated her like a woman. He made her feel human in a way she had never experienced. They fell in love slowly then, all at once. He proposed on a beach in San Diego with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. She said yes without thinking, without fear, for the first time in her life. Elena believed she could finally stop running. The call came at 3 a.m. Victor's voice was calm, polite. He said he had her doctor, gave her 1 hour, Desert Inn Road, no weapons, come alone. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just moved. When she arrived, the warehouse was full. 30 men, maybe more. Daniel was tied to a chair, blood on his face, a rope around his chest. Victor stepped from the shadows and offered her one more chance. Work for me, or watch him die. Her answer came in movement. In 10 seconds, she dropped 5 men. In 30, she was a blur. Her fists landed like thunder elbows, cracked ribs, knees shattered spines. She didn't stop until there was no one left standing. But she was too late. They had started hurting him before she ever got the call. He died in her arms trying to speak, but she couldn't hear him over her own screaming. That moment broke something in her that never healed. 1 week later, Master Crawford was shot outside his studio. No warning. No chance to fight back. They left a note on his chest. This is what happens when Thunderhand says no. She didn't attend his funeral. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She disappeared. She burned every photo, crushed every trophy, cut off every connection to the life she once lived. She paid cash for facial surgery just enough to blur the details. Her sharp features softened. Her eyes, still ice blue, were dulled with contact lenses. She dyed her hair a dusty brown, then let it grow out slowly. She moved to New York where no one asked questions. 8 million people all trying to mind their own business. It was perfect. She chose the name Sarah Brooks because it meant nothing. She forged her documents, created a new past, got a job at the library, and never looked back. The only thing she kept was the small wooden chest. Inside were 5 black belts, a photo of Daniel on the beach, the ring he never got to place on her hand, and a letter from Master Crawford. It said she was born for more than destruction. That real strength meant knowing when not to fight. Elena Volkov died the night Daniel did. Not in the papers, not in public, but in her heart. What remained was Sarah, quiet, invisible, safe. She lived like a ghost to protect the people she might one day love. But ghosts carry memory, and memory doesn't stay buried forever. Part 4. The Humiliation Before the Rise. Sarah stood alone while the rest of the students quickly paired off, moving into their usual training groups with easy laughter and quiet confidence. No one made eye contact with her. It wasn't open hostility, just the kind of casual dismissal that stung deeper than words. Brad clapped his hands, calling for sparring partners, then looked at Sarah and raised his eyebrows like her presence had slipped his mind. Ashley, rolling her eyes, stepped forward with the fake generosity of someone who expected to be congratulated for making a sacrifice. She called it grandma duty, loud enough for the room to hear. Sarah gave a polite nod and moved into position. Her stance was deliberately soft, too wide, too slow. Every fiber of her muscle memory screamed against it, but she kept herself small. This wasn't supposed to be a fight. Ashley attacked with a dramatic kick, all flair and no control. Sarah let it hit her shoulder, staggered backward, and landed awkwardly. Laughter broke through the room like glass shattering across tile. Mike called out that his grandmother moved better and she'd been dead 5 years. Brad walked over, hands on his hips, the belt around his waist tied too loosely. He said maybe karate wasn't for everyone, maybe she'd be more comfortable in a senior Tai Chi class. Sarah didn't speak. She felt her breath deepen, not out of exhaustion, but out of control. She wanted to correct him, to fix his stance, to show him what a real center of gravity felt like. But she just nodded again, letting his ignorance hang in the air. Someone asked what she did for work. She said librarian. The laughter got louder. Mike called her quiet and boring, perfect for a life of shushing people in cardigans. Another student added that maybe she came to find a boyfriend because desperate middle-aged women always showed up looking for action. The room circled her now, not with curiosity but with cruelty. They moved in slow patterns, punches and kicks thrown into the air, choreographed to scare, not strike. It was theater, and she was the unwilling prop. Her eyes scanned the group. Brad dropped his guard after every combination. Ashley's power came from arrogance, not form. Mike led with his shoulders and swung too wide. Not one of them had ever felt real fear. They had no idea how far from war they really stood. They insulted her clothing, her body, her silence. Said she looked nervous, said she should probably sit down before she passed out. But inside her chest, something else was waking up. She wasn't afraid. She was furious. It had been years since she had let Elena speak. Years since she'd even allowed herself to imagine who she used to be. But now, surrounded by these children playing warrior, that part of her stirred like a storm behind closed doors. Her fists clenched before she could stop them. Not tight enough to strike, but enough to feel the tension rise up her arms like smoke from an old fire. One more insult and the balance would tip. Brad offered her a chance to redeem herself, told her to take a swing at him, promised he would go easy. He moved into a stance so sloppy it made her jaw tighten. His weight was all wrong, his hands too low. He had no idea. Sarah didn't lift her hand. She didn't throw a punch. She turned and walked off the mat. The dojo fell silent behind her, confused and vaguely disappointed. She didn't give them what they wanted. She stepped out into the cold night. The air hit her face and brought clarity she didn't ask for. Her breath was steady, but her pulse pounded behind her eyes. It wasn't the humiliation that hurt. It was what they had done to the place. The dojo was supposed to be sacred, about discipline, honor, protection, but they had made it a stage, a place where power bullied and laughed. She walked aimlessly for a few blocks before ending up in a small coffee shop. Her hands shook as she reached for her wallet. A photo slipped from her coat pocket. Daniel's face smiled up from the beach they never went back to. She stared at it for a long time, remembered his voice. "You're more than just your fists." But now maybe it was time to remember that fists, when used for the right reasons, still had a place in this world. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to reclaim something. Not her fame, not her old life. Just the truth. The part of her that still believed in what Master Crawford taught. That real warriors don't dominate. They serve. She stood, finished her drink, and walked home through the soft quiet of falling snow. Her jaw was set. Her mind was clear. Tomorrow night was advanced sparring class. And maybe, just maybe, she'd remind them what a real fighter looked like. Part 5. The Return of Thunderhand. 5.1. The quiet storm arrives. The next evening, Yamamoto Dojo was buzzing before class even started. Word had spread about the librarian who got humiliated during sparring. Some students from other classes came early just to watch the show. Sarah stepped inside with her hair pulled tight into a ponytail held in place by a plain black hair tie. Her workout clothes were still simple, nothing flashy, but something about her posture was different. She moved through the room without hesitation, quiet and composed, the same woman but now impossible to overlook. Even before she spoke, the room felt different. Brad greeted her with that same smug grin, full of shallow charm and empty confidence. He welcomed her back like a host inviting someone to their own embarrassment. Mike cracked his knuckles loud enough for everyone to hear. Sarah's eyes didn't waver. Her tone was soft but sharper than before. She said she was here to train. Nothing more. The way she stood made a few students shift their weight without meaning to. Brad motioned toward Ashley with a shrug. "Let the star take the first round." Ashley grinned and bounced onto the mat like she had something to prove. Sarah stepped into position. There was a pause as Ashley shifted into a showy stance. Her form was clean but meant to impress. Sarah didn't pose. She simply stood still, balanced and centered, hands loose but ready. Brad gave the signal. Ashley launched a spinning kick fast but too wide. Sarah stepped forward inside the arc and redirected the leg with one hand. With the other, she gripped Ashley's collar and used her own momentum. Ashley hit the mat flat on her back, the air knocked from her lungs before she could react. The room went silent. It happened too fast for most to see clearly. Ashley rolled over, coughing, eyes wide. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Sarah hadn't even broken a sweat. Mike didn't wait. He jumped onto the mat, face red with something between anger and disbelief. He said he wanted a real fight. Sarah nodded once and took her stance again. He came in heavy, swinging with raw power. Sarah didn't move until the last second. She let the punch sail past her cheek, then placed her elbow gently against his ribcage. The contact looked soft, barely a touch. Mike dropped to his knees, gasping, his hands pressed to his side. His face turned pale, breath shallow and panicked. No one said a word. The students who had laughed the night before now stood completely still. Their expressions were blank, caught between confusion and something close to fear. Brad's smile faltered. He asked who she was, but the question sounded different now. It didn't come from arrogance. It came from uncertainty. Sarah remained on the mat, hands relaxed by her sides. She hadn't raised her voice or bragged. She didn't look angry, just calm, unshakably calm. A brown belt whispered to another student that he had never seen movements like that. The way she flowed, the timing, the control. One of them said it looked like the clips he'd seen from old tournament legends. It wasn't the power that scared them. It was the ease. Sarah looked around the room, her expression unreadable. She hadn't humiliated anyone. She had simply revealed what had always been there. Now they were beginning to see it. She didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She just stood there like someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. And yet somehow, had proved everything. The silence stretched, long enough for the students to feel it deep in their chests. This wasn't the same woman who had stumbled yesterday. That woman had never existed. And, without a single threat or word of pride, the entire room began to understand. They were not in the presence of a beginner. They were in the presence of something far more dangerous and far more real. 5.2 Thunderhand revealed. Brad's voice cracked as he shouted for everyone to rush her. 5 brown belts stepped forward, unsure but obedient. They moved as a unit, believing their numbers would do what strength could not. Sarah didn't flinch. She turned slightly, shifted her weight, and let their attacks come. She moved like water through fire, redirecting, sweeping, guiding. Bodies hit the mat with soft thuds one after another. Not brutal, not cruel, just efficient. A palm here, a sidestep there. She never struck harder than she had to. 10 seconds later, all 5 were down, groaning, breathless, confused. The dojo was silent again. No one reached for their phones. No one laughed. A student in the back whispered something under his breath. Another asked him to repeat it. His voice was shaky when he said it louder. That movement. I've seen it before. Someone else stepped back and muttered a name they hadn't said in years, a name carried more in legend than in fact. Thunderhand. Brad stumbled backward, eyes wide. He said it was impossible, that Thunderhand was dead, killed in a fire years ago. Everyone knew that. It was part of the myth. Sarah stood in the center of the room. She didn't deny it, didn't explain. She reached down slowly and pulled back the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Her forearm was lean-toned and marked. A small tattoo, a closed fist wrapped in lightning. The room inhaled as one. No one spoke. Ashley's face turned white as realization settled in. Mike sat against the wall, still holding his ribs, looking at her like she had become something unearthly. Brad dropped his stance completely. His belt hung loose, forgotten. Sarah looked around the room, her voice quiet but steady. She asked if it was so hard to believe that someone who chose peace might once have lived through war, that a woman who helped children learn to read might also know how to drop a man twice her size. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Her presence filled the space more than volume ever could. She said Thunderhand had died, but not in a fire. Thunderhand died the night Daniel was taken, the night her mentor was murdered for training her. And that from those ashes Sarah Brooks was born, not to hide but to heal, to disappear because love had cost her too much. Ashley began to cry, quiet at first, then with a trembling apology. She said they hadn't known, that they never meant real harm, that they were sorry. Sarah looked at her not with anger but pity. She said they weren't sorry for what they did, only sorry for who they did it to. And that was different. She turned slowly, eyes passing over each student. They claimed rank, wore belts, memorized kata, but they didn't understand what any of it meant. That karate began and ended with respect. That real strength protected. It never humiliated. She walked toward the door, every step measured and final. No one stopped her. No one dared. At the threshold she paused, spoke to the room without turning around, said that tomorrow another woman might walk through that door. She might be older. She might be scared. She might be healing from things they couldn't see. And when she walked in, they would have to decide who they were. The silence that followed was deeper than shame. It was reflection. Brad took off his black belt with shaking hands and laid it on the floor. He called out to her, not as an instructor, not as a fighter, but as a student. He asked her to come back, not to prove anything, but to teach. One by one the others followed, unbuckled their belts, set them down, a quiet offering, not of surrender, but of understanding. Sarah looked back once, just for a moment. The light caught her face, and for the first time they saw her not as Thunderhand, not as the ghost in the library, but as a woman who had walked through fire and chosen grace. She didn't stay. She didn't need to. Her silence taught more than their voices ever had, and in that moment, they all understood. Some victories are not won with fists. They are won by revealing what strength truly is. Sarah stepped outside into the falling snow, the soft hush of winter wrapping around her like a final bow. The cold air touched her cheeks, but her chest felt warm, steady. The dojo door clicked shut behind her, leaving the echoes of a past that had finally been seen. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel angry. What she felt was stillness. Her boots crunched along the sidewalk as she turned the corner, the lights of the city glowing faint through the flakes. The photo of Daniel sat in her coat pocket, his smile pressed close to her heart. She touched it gently as she walked, remembering the sound of his voice in the quiet moments. 2 blocks down, she noticed a girl standing on the edge of a small alley, thin coat sagging backpack, the slouch of someone used to shrinking. 3 boys stood too close, not violent, but circling with words sharp enough to hurt. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She just stepped beside them and bent slowly, pretending to pick something up from the ground. She held out her hand palm open. "There's a $20 bill here. Did one of you drop it?" The boys blinked, glanced at each other, then grabbed the bill and scattered without a word. The girl stood frozen, clutching her backpack like it might disappear. Sarah smiled gently and asked if she was okay. The girl nodded, eyes wide, voice small. She said they took her lunch money almost every day. Sarah listened without judgment, then asked if she'd ever considered learning how to defend herself. The girl looked unsure, like the idea had never been offered before. Sarah said she knew a dojo that had recently become a much safer place, that if she wanted, she could walk her there tomorrow. They exchanged names and a promise to meet after school. The girl turned away with her shoulders just a little straighter. Sarah stood watching her go, the snow still falling, her breath curling up into the night. Back at home, her apartment felt the same, quiet, clean, ordinary. She changed into her softest sweater and made a cup of tea, the old kettle humming low. The wooden chest was back in the closet, closed, undisturbed, but the hair tie still circled her wrist like a quiet reminder, not of what she could do, but of who she had chosen to become. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, the lights of the street flickering below. Somewhere in the city, the students at the dojo were still processing, still asking questions, still feeling the weight of what they had witnessed. But she had no plans to return as Thunderhand. That woman had done her part and paid her price. What the dojo needed now wasn't a legend. It needed a guide. Once a week she would show up, not to demonstrate power, but to teach humility, purpose, and control, to make sure that anyone who stepped onto that mat looking for strength would find it. The kind that didn't need to knock others down to feel tall. The kind that knew when to fight and when to walk away. The kind that didn't leave scars but built confidence. Sarah looked down at the photo again. Daniel's face was worn at the edges, the paper creased from years of movement. She traced his jawline with her thumb and whispered into the silence. Not for glory, not for revenge, just because it's right. The snow continued outside, layering the city in quiet white. Somewhere in the building, a child laughed through the walls. Somewhere in the city, someone else was being underestimated. And somewhere deep within her, Sarah felt something settle. Not the emptiness of hiding, but the calm of being fully known and still choosing peace. That was her legacy now. Not the knockouts, not the belts, but the decision to return when it would have been easier to disappear. To forgive when it would have been justified to destroy. To teach what power really means. That dignity doesn't demand applause. It simply lives where purpose does. And she would live there too. Quietly, always watching, always ready. Because true warriors don't just fight. They make sure others never have to.